Hello, my name is Seewing Yee, and my special guest is Richard Advani from Guarantee Rate Mortgage, who does loans, mostly investment loans for real estate investors in all 50 states. He has done it for many years. We share the same philosophy. Richard worked with many real estate investment groups throughout the country. We feed him as much loans as possible. Richard can help real estate investors finance their properties in good, affordable markets in the U.S. I'm going to ask Richard to share with us from a high level his journey through his own real estate portfolio. Richard, you have helped thousands of real estate investors get financing. Today, we're going to do something different. We can go over your personal portfolio because you practice what you preach. And I practice what I preach as well within my real estate investing club. I'm happy you're being transparent. You're being open-minded because you are not only a investment loan agent, you are scaling your portfolio. So shit, from the beginning, when you start buying turnkey rental properties, for those of you who do not know, Richard have more than one full-time job. He had a full-time job, very successful, he and his team. And he also is a professional race car driver. He also have two other side business. This man is on a high. He never sleeps, but in a good way. From the beginning, share from high level what kind of properties. Then over time, getting to build your portfolio year by year basis. Even right now, housing crash, the recession, the inflation, the economy, all these doom and gloom negative headlines out there. People say, don't buy this, don't buy that, don't invest. And yet, you continue to buy regardless of economic conditions. And I appreciate that. And I agree with your philosophy, but you just be transparent and explain to the audience why you're able to overcome all the negative headlines, all the negativity, not just currently, but over time using dollar cost averaging, scaling your portfolio. At the end of this video, I want you to share with the people how most people have a 40-40 rule. What about 40-40 rule? They work 40 or more hours per week, potentially retire in 40 years and almost have nothing to show for maybe your social security income, if social security is still available by the time you retire. Instead of 40-40 rule, Richard and many of our investors that Richard has helped are practicing the 1/10 rule. You work 1 hour per week and make $10,000 a monthly passive income when you're all said and done with your real estate portfolio scenario. So start from the beginning and share your transformation and motivation and your commitment to your long-term real estate investment goals.
Thanks, Seewing. Been in the mortgage business for a little over 17 years. 2 years into that, I bought my first rental property, and I'll go over broad level my journey and my path. What's interesting is you'll see the types of properties I ended up buying as I gained more experience evolved a little. The first property I bought, I was 20 years old, and it was a multi-unit for 23 grand, I remember. And I bought the property retail just on the open market. The property was rented out for $1,200 a month, $600 per unit. I was going to be a multimillionaire in a year, right? With all that cash flow on a $23,000 property. 2 months in, 3 months in, reality set. The property had tons of deferred maintenance, needed a new roof, which the new roof was half of what I paid for the property. A month later, needed a furnace, and I had high tenant turnover, and I made a big mistake, right? The mistake that most investors make, which is ignoring everything else except for the ROI and the cash flow. And it's interesting because I get so many investors I talk to on a daily basis that aren't heading down the path of making those same mistakes, which we'll kind of get into here more. So the second property I bought, I learned from my mistakes, right? I didn't buy a property. So I thought I learned from my mistakes. I didn't buy a property retail. I bought it from a turnkey provider I found online. So another random, not referred vendor that I didn't know anyone that had done business with. I think I found them on Bigger Pockets at the time or something on that first 2-unit property I bought for 23 grand. But I knew the experience I had on that property was relating to the mistakes I made. A year and a half later, dip my toes back in the water, pick up a couple turnkey properties. What I didn't realize at the time, of course, is turnkey is a very relative term, right? There's no set rules of what a turnkey property is. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with non-trusted and referred people online, it's easy to almost get taken advantage of. So long story short, I bought a couple of these properties. I figured out very quickly turnkey was a relative term. And the type of turnkey properties I bought were the lipstick on a pig type properties. There were issues with them. The guy bought it at auction. threw paint on it, made it look as good as he could in pictures. And then I bought it. And 2 or 3 months later, I started realizing the situation that I was in. Our repairs were adding up. The management wasn't fantastic. I didn't like the tenant base that I had. So once again, I thought I was making a good decision, and I learned from my mistakes, right? But I made new mistakes, which was unfortunate. I still have 2 of those properties. I didn't end up selling one 5 years later. It was an absolute nightmare. And if you notice, the common theme of the story here is I was not working with trusted people, right? I was a retail buyer. I went online. I was submitting offers on properties. Then I went what I thought was in retail, working with an unscrupulous turnkey advisor. And then at that point in my career, so about 3-4 years into doing mortgages, I started doing more and more investor mortgages and working with more and more investment groups like Seewings. And I started to see the part that I was missing, right? Which was the most important part of out-of-state investing, the team, a trusted, reputable team that's been there for a long time, that's trying to make a lot of money off of me, but by a long-term relationship and not by one property at a time. There's a lot of unscrupulous turnkey providers out there where they're just trying to sell you a property. They know they're never going to hear from you again because it's going to be a bad experience. But what I ended up seeing and meeting were resources that wanted to build that long-term relationship with the client, right? They've been doing business for 20 or 30 years in that market. And their goal was for you to succeed because they're not making huge margins on them. They're making money, but their business model is doing scale, right? To where you buy one, it's going to do well. You're going to buy another. You're going to refer your friends. You're going to refer your families and so forth. So I started obviously growing my relationships with these real estate teams and markets. And I started buying a different product and more importantly, a more trusted product. I would say 70% of what I own are new construction homes in strategic markets. The beautiful thing was not buying retail on those. Seewing has pre-established relationships with developers, builders, sales teams. So it's a lot different of a buying experience and you mitigate obviously a lot of the risk. Now, what I also learned was turnkey wasn't this big evil thing. And I knew it wasn't, right? I just didn't go on the right path. And also I didn't have guidance. I was buying retail. Since I bought quite a few turnkey properties from 2 to 3 units to single family homes and have had a great amount of success with them. Once again, working with the right strategic partners. Now, I think I've seen more and more in the last really 2 or 3 years, the long-term wealth building aspect of real estate or the only wealth building aspect of real estate, right? As much as we all chase a 7 or 8% cash on cash return, on most properties that adds up to $150 to $180, even if you can get that in that market. So I asked my clients, well, what are you going to do with that cash flow? Maybe a dinner? Is that going to change your life? No, it's not, right? You're not investing for that 7% ROI. You're investing for the long-term growth potential and tax benefits that real estate gives you. I'm not saying don't look at ROI. ROI is important to compare one investment to the other, assuming like investments, but merely only investing based on the ROI is silly. And even if a property is making you a 3%, 2% cash on cash return today, and as we talked about, you're not investing for that today's return, that growth happens 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 15, 20 years later. And the way I mentioned I was experiencing that, I bought properties across the Midwest, new construction over the last 6, 7, 8 years for 170, 180, 200. Granted, the same properties today are close to 300 grand. At the time, I was getting a 7% cash on cash, which is fantastic for a new construction, lower risk asset. And the rents were $13.95 and I was getting my 7%. Now, fast forward 4, 5, 6 years later with inflation, set aside the appreciation, right? These weren't even appreciation markets. These markets historically appreciated 2 to 3% a year. And that's the assumption on which I bought the properties. I bought them more for the cash flow it was giving me. Now, those same properties today, set aside the fact that instead of being worth 180, they're worth 280 or 300,000. That doesn't matter to me because I'm not trying to sell. But what is cool is the rents that were $13.95 went up to $15.95, and then they went up to $17.95, right? So what happened to my cash flow? right? I was making 7% cash on cash, a little under $200 a month profit at $13.95. Now I'm getting $17.95, $400 a month more. So my cash flow went from about $200 to $600. And my ROI went from 7% cash on cash to over 20%. And keep in mind, I'm not even talking about appreciation. I'm not talking about future appreciation, rent. I'm talking about now, today, 6 years later, my cash on cash return only is 20+%. Now factor in, when you look at your mortgage statement, how much is going to principal every month, right? Out of these loans that I'm making a $1,200 mortgage payment, $200 was going to principal. Now $450 is going to principal, right? So now this one property that was making me $200 a month is making me $600 a month on the front end. I'm paying down $400 to $500 a month of principal on the back end. So I'm building about $1,000 a month in wealth on this property every year, $12,000 a year in wealth conservatively. And once again, it's not taking into account, hey, I owe 120 on it. It's worth 300 today. It's gone up substantially in value. And the reason I mention this is a lot of people today are like, well, what are you doing? What happens if you buy it and prices go down next year? And I don't care is the answer. I'm not buying it for a year. As we discussed, you're not buying it for that ROI, for that cash on cash return, right? It's dinner. So 1 month, every month you could go buy dinner for yourself. That's not why you're buying it. You're buying it for 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, assuming you're not about to retire. Most of us are buying it for the future. So if I'm not planning on selling an asset in the next 2, 3, 4 years, I don't care what some guy writes on a piece of paper next year that it's worth. I don't care what the market does. Absolutely, I do care if rents move down a little, but most of these properties do have buffer to absorb that. But the other thing too is there's so much mass hysteria. And it's funny, literally as we started this call, I'm reading an article and it says new home sales jump to 10-month high in January. Prices fall, right? And this is Reuters this morning. I know you guys probably can't see it. So I'm reading through the article and they're saying new home sales are up 7% this month in the past 10 months, which isn't surprising. They've been super slow, right? So it's not hard to be up from there. And incentives, builder incentives are up and stuff. So what was interesting, and I've got it pulled up right here, is house prices dropped from a year ago, right? That's the title of this. It takes about 5 paragraphs to get to where they actually talk about that. And I'll read it to you. The median house price in January nationally, was $427,500. 400 grand median house price. It was a drop from last year of 0.7%. 0.7%, down from 452,000 in December. Okay, so we had a 0.7% drop in the last 12 months in real estate. What do you feel like, everyone out there, when you read the headlines, right? Market's going to crash, real estate. I don't blame you. Most people don't read 4 paragraphs deep on this, right? But if you read 4 paragraphs deep, you'll see that house prices did drop 0.7%. So when people ask me, well, what if prices drop in the next year? Even if they drop 5%, who cares? Once again, I'm not trying to sell it. But the reality is they dropped 0.7% in the last 12 months. Now, look, this is national average. Some markets may have dropped 7%, 8%. Some markets went up. You heard me. Some markets went up in the last 12 months. The interesting thing is, even with this 0.7% drop from last year, right? Houses nationally are still up 25% from 2.5 years ago, from COVID, when everyone was like, run, loan forgiveness, and people aren't going to make their rent payments. And oh my God, what's going to happen to you as an investor? I went through all of that. Friends, family, it was like, have you been getting your rent on your 20 properties? And I didn't have one person skip a beat, honestly. Not one. And most investors I talked to didn't really have tons of people not paying rent either. So I'm not sure where all this money went or where all this impact was. But what did we experience, right? The opposite. Property values rallied 30%. Rents rallied also 20, 30%. So I think we're at a very unique opportunity right now to buy properties, because most people aren't looking at this. Is property values have gone up dramatically, right? Rents have gone up more in percentage than property values have gone up.
Yep.
Right. Yep. But the only variable that's not making these deals super sexy is the rates, right? But guess what? Rates are not permanent. When you factor in the builder incentives that are being offered right now, when you factor in the inventory that's available to you, and if any of you experienced investors will know, prior to a year ago, you couldn't even buy a property in 2023. You were signing contracts in 2024 and 2025, right? And also you couldn't buy in a lot of neighborhoods. Builders weren't selling to investors. They were selling to primary home buyers. And you have these neighborhoods of 500 homes where they've got 50 homes available, and now they're willing to consider investors. Guess what? I want a home in that development of owner-occupied homes where I'm going to put a tenant, because that's going to be great for property values. It's going to be great for rent. It's going to be great for everything in between. And the interesting thing is, and I'll run it right here with my calculator, but if you take a $200,000 loan, right? 3 months ago, rates were at 7.5. Now they're up right now. Rates are rallying, but they're still in the high sixes. But at 7.5%, 30-year fixed, your payment is $1,998. Let's call it $1,400 at 7.5, right? They dropped to 6.5 over the course of the last month or so. That payment drops from $1,398 to $1,264 at 6.5%. So that's $140 a month in additional cash flow on that property. Assuming you invested $60,000 into that property, down payment 25% plus closing costs, you invested $60,000 into that property. That $140 a month is $1,680 a year divided by your investment. That's 3% ROI, 3% increased ROI. What happens now? Not if, but when rates drop back down, right? As inflation comes under wraps. Look, I don't think investor rates are going to go back to the high threes like we had it, and primary home rates are going to be in the mid twos. Hopefully, it'd be great for my business, but let's assume that's an anomaly. Let's say primary home rates that were in the high twos settle back down in the mid fours, almost 2% higher than the lows of the last 5 years. And let's say investor rates, let's even say mid fives, 5.5. I would hope they'd be lower, but let's say 5.5, right? So what happens to that monthly payment on that $200,000 loan at 5.5? So that payment at 5.5, $1,135 from $1,400. You're talking about $270 a month in increased cash flow, 6 to 7% of increased ROI, right? When rates at 5.5. Now, if you've been looking at properties for a little while and you think about this, when rates were at 3.5, 4% for investors, we could barely make 2%. Literally, the cash flow ROIs you're getting is the same as today at the higher prices. But why? Well, rents actually went up dramatically, right? The fact my rents went up from $1,495 to $1,795 is nuts. So rents have gone up even higher as a percentage than property value. But what's changed is the interest rates, not the foundation of the investment. And I ran that at 5.5, right? If we run it at 4%, which we were all getting, the payment's $954. That's an extra $400 or $500 a month in cash flow. Can you imagine buying a new construction property a year and a half ago if I told you with enough rent, you're going to make $600 a month in cash flow? Like that's a 7 or 8, 9% ROI. That's insane. Increase in ROI just because of rates. What I'm going with this is when you look at a pro forma today, where you're making a 2% cash on cash, and you're like, oh my God, that's not a good return. When rates drop to even 5.5, that 2% is going to become 5% cash on cash, right? Right off the bat. That's without any rent increases. That's with none of that. Then you factor in, as we all experience with inflation. You guys have Amazon at home. Go and look at for anything you bought 2 years ago in your order history and look at it today. And I guarantee it'll be 30 to 60% higher today. I do it all the time. And it's nuts. It hurts to look at what I bought something for 2 years ago to what I'm paying for today. Now, using that same logic, common sense, 2%, 8%, 10% inflation, whatever rate you want to use, 10 years from now, rents are going to be higher based on inflation. Even if it's 2%, which the average is probably closer to 7% nationally in the last 10 years, let's call it 7%. So at 7% inflation, $2,000 a month in rent's going to be how much higher in 10 years? Percent higher.
Yes.
70% higher, which means that $2,000 property is going to rent for $3,400, right? So what happens with your cash flow? And once again, when you refinance, 2% becomes 6%. As rents start going up, your cash flow on that's going to end up being 15, 18, 20% in the long run. The longer you hold it, the better. And obviously strategies are going to vary from person to person, how old you are when you plan on retiring and when you need that income replacement. Getting back to it, I know one thing Seewing wanted me to cover. Frankly, I probably need to be more spreadsheet driven like most people. I couldn't tell you exactly the amount of cash flow I hold on to every month from my portfolio. I do have a couple short-term rentals as well that generate a sizable amount of income. And also I have all the proceeds of my accounts deposited into the same investment account. So it just grows and I use it to purchase additional properties. But if I was to guess, I would say net off of my properties, probably in that $15,000 to $17,000 a month range. A portion of that comes obviously from some of the short-term rentals that I have, but even the long-term rentals, I think 17 long-term rentals on average probably generate at this point $500 a month each in cash flow, if not a little more. So you're talking about a sizable amount of income and also what could be income replacement, right? And I've generated this portfolio in really the last 15 years, but I was learning the first 3 to 5 years and making acquisitions that weren't the best acquisitions. I'd say most of the growth for me has really happened in the last decade. And is it possible to create a real estate portfolio that could give you enough passive income to not work in a decade? Yes, I've done it. I want to grow more and I want to have more properties. And I'm 38. My goal is to have 50 properties by 50 years old, which look, I could probably do that in 6 months if I wanted to be more aggressive and re-leverage properties. And investing is a matter of comfort level to the individual investor, right? And there's no right or wrong answer. The right answer is what you're comfortable with. Obviously, the right answer is what's going to make us money. But I personally haven't re-leveraged properties to buy more and re-leveraged to buy more. Because once again, I'm in it super long term and I want to buy a property, set it and forget it. Now, I have a lot of investors that do re-leverage responsibly and have scaled their portfolios even quicker. But who's right? Who's wrong? Both of us are right because both of us are investing to what our goals are and to what our comfort level is. So point being is, once again, I could have scaled it much quicker. What's interesting though is we take people on the daily basis that have one property in California where most of us live, right? A rental that was an inherited property or it was a house you used to live in and you're like, why sell it, right? I've got a property like that as well. And you're like, I might as well rent it out. And you kind of set it, forget about it. And then one day you get me and Seewing knocking on your door. You realize that $1.2 million property that you owe $250,000 on, that you're renting for $4,500 a month. You could probably triple that amount of income by doing a 1031 and diversifying. So what's cool is we'll take people who are near retirement, who don't have enough retirement money, who have one high value rental in California, making them net $2,700 a month. And we're able to help them 1031 that, take that $900,000 in proceeds and buy 15 properties or 20 properties. And now they've got 12 to 15,000 a month in cash flow within 4 months. Within 4 to 6 months, we build that portfolio. And I did it from my mom too. And I can speak from it from personal experience. She had one paid off $1 million property in California that was making her $4,300 a month gross. We ended up diversifying her into 8 properties. The interesting thing was she bought one property in cash. It was a $500,000 quad. She got in contract a long time ago. That $500,000 quad rents for $5,700 a month. So with half of the money in cash, and later we re-leveraged $200,000 from that 500 and then used it to buy more properties and so forth. But from one property, she generated $5,700 a month. From all the properties in the grand scheme, overall, the plan we put together for her, she ended up generating, I think, around $12,500 a month in cash flow from around $4,000. So it is possible to create real estate income, replacement income very quickly, but you need to have capital or you need a 1031. But for most of us, like myself, you can still build wealth and build income replacement with a 6, 10-year, 12-year plan. It's very realistic, but you need to start looking long-term. Don't just look at, this property makes 2%. I can get 5% in my savings account. Well, these days you could probably get 5% in a CD, but guess what? You're still losing money because inflation's 15%. That's where real estate comes in, right? That hedge against inflation, that fixed rate. Your overhead's fixed on this thing for 30 years, but the tenants, they're not, right? They have to play the inflation roller coaster and their stuff's going to keep going up. I think I'm a prime example of, especially someone, if you get started in your 20s, by the time you're in your mid 30s, you're going to have a good portfolio. And the last thing I'll say, you don't need to be rich to buy real estate. Yes, you have to be diligent in saving up down payments, but at the end of the day, if you maintain a low debt load and you try to buy a property every year and a half by saving up $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, over the course of 10 or 15 years, you can do that. And look, a lot of people were making 150 to 180K a year. A lot of them rent these days because you don't have enough. That's not enough money to buy a house. And, you have that supplemental, you have that rather additional income that you could save $4 or $5 grand a month. That means you could buy a property a year. But unfortunately, we live in an instant gratification area where I live in Southern California. Can't tell you how many people rent an apartment in LA and drive a Lamborghini. They're like, well, I can't buy anyways. Might as well rent an apartment and drive a Lamborghini. Well, you can do that, right? Buy 3 rentals and let them pay for the Lamborghini. Closing words are, get off the fence. If you have the means to purchase some property, use your common sense. It's supply and demand. People are living longer. Land isn't growing, except on the big island here and there when volcano goes off. Real estate's always, historically, it always has been and always is going to be a huge play. And people are like, oh, prices are going up, but it's not affordability and it's not fair to the people that are renting. Set all that aside. At the end of the day, we need roofs over heads, whether you're renting or you're buying, whether you can afford to rent or buy, whether I buy it and you rent it or you buy it yourself. There's roofs that need to be overhead. There's not enough roofs. Right? If you got 50 people in line to buy a house, then one house, what's going to happen? Prices are going to continue to rise. And the most important thing is go to whitehouse.gov, go to Fannie Mae. We're short almost 5 million homes nationally. 5 million homes. Nationally, you know which inventory is available on the market today? Around 600,000 homes.
Yep.
We need 5 million. Tell me real estate's going to crash. Tell me all of us investors are going to be screwed. Tell me all this stuff. But then show me where it's coming from, right? House prices has gone down 0.1% last year. Supply and demand issues not cured. Rent to purchase price, rent to purchase price is the highest I've ever seen it, which is nuts because rates are so high that you can buy a property in cash right now and make a higher ROI than if you leverage, right? Our ROIs were like, 2%, 3%. Well, if you pay cash, you get 5.5% on it, which is nuts. We've never seen that because we've never seen rents be as high as they are in relation to purchase prices they are today. But last thing I'll say too is what's the variable in there? Rates, right? So rates come down, cash flow goes up, 2% becomes 8%, and 8% becomes 20% over 10 years.
Well, Richard, you cover so much. This is a real estate master class that everyone should watch. I'll make it a point to do that. So whether someone is a primary home buyer or real estate investor try to buy a rental property, what you just articulated over this past 30 minutes is priceless, very inspiring, very motivational. You should become a motivational speaker. But you're too busy. You're too busy. One thing I want to say, think about it. If people did not have your portfolio, 20 properties or whatever, you can do more. I get it. Well, on a typical person you can create passive income based on your current portfolio versus somebody who's a W-2 salary that continue to work 40 to 60 hours a week to slave away on a regular job where you can trigger passive income equal to somebody's salary, somebody working 40 to 60 hours per week. Now, tell me this one thing before I let you go. How many hours you personally manage your real estate portfolio per week or per month?
That's a great question, actually. It may actually surprise people. And keep in mind, I have 2 short-term rentals in my neighborhood. One sleeps 25, one sleeps 15. So at any given week, I'm hosting 40 people, including that and the 18 long-term rentals I have, maybe an hour a week. If I didn't have the short-term rentals, I would say an hour a month. The thing that takes the longest is just counting up the checks that come in. No, I'm kidding. But no, if I was all long-term rentals, I'm not exaggerating. Hour a month. With the short-term rentals, I spend about an hour a week. Maybe if you take into account the one of 18 properties that has a turnover in a given year and the things that go along with that, maybe 2 hours a month. I'm not exaggerating. So yeah, not a lot of time. And I'm not very proficient on Excel and all that. A lot of my clients are. So then my hour is 2 minutes to them. It all automatically uploads in the spreadsheet. I'm a little more manual.
Richard, that's all we need to hear. Priceless presentation. This is the best presentation. This is very inspiring. Any investors out there, whether you are experienced, newbie investor, or primary home buyer, I'm going to make it a point to create this video presentation. Thank you, Richard Advani, so much from Guaranteed Rate Mortgage. He's priceless, like I said. Thank you so much. Very motivational. I'll see you next time. We invite you back in a couple of more weeks. We have another great conversation. Thank you. High value presentation. Richard Advani, thank you so much. Have a nice day.